Montana Territory. September 1879. The scream of a hawk cracked the high silence just before he heard her voice, sharp, panicked, and too close to something dangerous. Gideon Hart reined in his horse at the edge of the ridge, eyes narrowing through the haze of pine smoke curling up from a controlled burn-down in the valley. He had been trailing elk sign most of the morning, saddle sore and half-frozen, but now his instincts flared sharper than any hunt. He slid down from the saddle, rifle in hand, and moved fast through the undergrowth. That was when he saw her. She was backed up against a rock shelf, breath coming in hard bursts, cheeks wind-burnt and scratched. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose from a braid, and her coat was torn at the shoulder. A black bear, easily 600 pounds, prowled a dozen feet in front of her, head low, snorting through the cold air. "Back away slow," Gideon said, voice low but steady as he stepped into view. The woman turned her head, startled, her lips trembling. I cannot move. My ankle." The bear gave a low growl. Gideon leveled the rifle. "I'll handle the bear. You hold on." The shot cracked through the pines. The bear reared, roared, and crashed into the brush, disappearing into the trees. Gideon waited, muscles strung tight, until the sound of it faded. Then he rushed to her. She was shaking, one hand pressed to her calf. Her eyes, wide and brown, locked onto his. "You all right?" he asked, crouching beside her. I think so. My name is Bess Varnett. I was trying to cross the ridge to reach the homestead in the next valley." Her voice cracked. "I got turned around. I fell." "Well, Bess," he said, carefully checking her ankle. "You are lucky I was out here today. You shot that bear like it was nothing." "I have been hunting since I was 10, he said with a small shrug. "Gideon Hart." She gave a tight nod, still trying to catch her breath. "Thank you, Gideon Hart." He looked at the swelling already forming around her ankle. "You are not walking anywhere on this, and the ridge is no place to camp overnight." He stood and offered his hand. "My horse is tied just down the slope. I will take you back to my cabin. It is a few miles, but it is safe." She hesitated, clearly trying to measure him. He kept his hand out steady. "You saved my life," she said at last, her fingers sliding into his. He helped her up gently, easing her weight onto him. "Let us get out of here before his cousins come looking." Gideon's cabin sat tucked behind a small stand of aspen, smoke curling slow from the chimney. He had built it himself over 3 years, every beam honed by hand, every stone in the hearth laid with care. It was not much, but it was warm and dry. He carried Bess inside, and she gasped softly at the sudden change in heat. He set her on the wooden bench near the hearth, already stacked with wool blankets. "I will get some water on. That ankle needs soaking." She nodded, teeth chattering as she peeled off her gloves. "I was trying to get to my cousin's place. He was supposed to meet me at the trail fork, but he never came." "You are far from any trail fork," Gideon said, frowning. "How long have you been out there?" "Since yesterday morning," she said softly. He paused, looking at her. "You walked all day and most of a night?" "I had to," she whispered. "There is no one left back in Elk Hollow. My father passed in the spring and I could not stay there alone." Gideon swallowed hard. He knew what it meant to lose everything. "Then you are staying here tonight." No argument. She met his eyes. "Thank you." He nodded, then busied himself with chores. Water heated, salve mixed from pine resin and bear grease, a quick stew thrown together from rabbit and potatoes. As the evening deepened, her shaking eased. She leaned back, watching the fire, her expression softening. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Have for years," he said. "After the war I came west, built quiet around me, tried to forget the rest." Her gaze lingered on him. You do not seem like a man who forgets much. He gave a short smile. You would be right. Later, she dozed while he sat by the fire, whittling a piece of pine. The wind outside howled, but in the cabin, it was quiet, safe. When she stirred awake, he helped her to the bed, the only one, and without a word, laid a pallet near the fire for himself. You do not have to do that, she said quietly. I do, he said, his voice gentle. She watched him as he settled onto the floor, her eyes shining in the firelight. Most men would not have helped, she said. Most would have seen a woman alone and thought something different. I am not most men, Gideon said simply. She smiled then, small but real. And for the first time in a long while, Gideon felt something stir in his chest, a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. By morning the snow came, soft and steady. The world outside the cabin turned white, and Bess could not travel anywhere even if she had wanted to. Her ankle was still swollen, and Gideon insisted she stay off it. He brought her tea, brewed strong and dark, and when she winced trying to shift her foot, he knelt without a word and adjusted the pillow under it. You are kind, she said, watching him. He looked up. I just do what needs doing. No, she said. It is more than that. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, not quick, not loud, but certain. Like the way the sun comes through heavy clouds for a moment and you just know it is going to break through for good. By nightfall, they played cards by lantern light. She beat him twice and laughed when he accused her of hiding queens. I am not that clever, she said. I think you are, he replied, leaning back in his chair. Her gaze held his for a beat too long. She looked away, cheeks pink. 2 days passed, then 3. The storm held them in, and slowly, the space between them shortened, not with words, but with looks, with shared silence, with the way he handed her a mug, fingers brushing. They talked in pieces about where they came from, about the things they had lost. I was supposed to marry once, she said one evening, staring into the fire. But he left, said the land was too hard, the winters too long. Gideon watched her, quiet. I think maybe he was right, she added softly. No, he said. He was just the wrong man. She looked up at him then, and something shifted between them, something that had been waiting to bloom. She did not look away this time, and neither did he. By the 6th morning, the snow began to ease. It clung to the pines in thick white coats and melted slow off the cabin roof with the rise of the sun. Gideon stepped outside to check the line he'd set the night before and came back with 2 snow-dampened rabbits. When he opened the door, Bess was bent forward, darning one of her wool stockings with careful stitches. You ought not be on that foot, he said, brushing snow from his coat. I'm not, she replied without looking up. Chair's sturdy enough, and I can't sit idle all day. He hung the rabbits on a nail beside the hearth and crouched to stir the banked coals back to life. She didn't speak again until he had a good flame going. You've no one that comes by? She asked. No trading partner? No neighbor over the hill? Used to be an old trapper, came through twice a year. Left the country last fall. Nearest soul now is 3 valleys east. That's 2 days on horseback. She set her stocking aside. I think I'd go mad with no one to talk to. I did for a while, he said. Then I got used to the quiet. She studied him. Used to it, or you prefer it? He met her eyes. Some of both. She nodded slowly, like she was turning that over in her mind. Later, while the stew simmered, she asked, What kind of name is Hart? Yours, I mean. Dutch on my father's side. They came through Ohio. Settled in the hills, stayed poor. My mother's people were from Virginia, she said. She used to say we had Welsh blood, but I never saw any sign of it. Just calloused hands and worry. He glanced toward her. You don't strike me as someone who gives in to worry easily. My hands are calloused, she said, lifting one. But I've had enough cause for worry to make me tired of it. They sat quiet after that, the only sound the wind curling low against the log walls and the soft bubble of the stew. When the light began to fade, she leaned forward with a wince and reached for her shawl. "Let me," he said, and draped it gently around her shoulders. Her voice came low. "You're careful with everything you touch." His hand paused where it rested on the edge of the shawl. "I've broken enough things to learn how not to." She turned toward him then, close enough that he could see the faint line of a scar above her temple, pale against her skin. "Did you fight?" she asked. He nodded once. "Shiloh, Stone's River, then west with Sherman. I don't talk on it." "I wouldn't ask you to," she said. "I only wondered what kind of fire made a man so quiet." He breathed out slow, and something in his chest let go a little. "I lost a brother," he said. "He died in the same field I walked off of." She didn't answer, just reached out and took his hand where it rested on his knee. Her palm was rough and warm. They sat that way until the fire burned low, neither speaking, neither needing to. The next morning, she tried to stand without help. He heard the scrape of the chair and turned from where he was splitting kindling. "You'll tear it worse," he said, crossing the room in 3 strides. "I need to start moving," she said, gripping the wall. "Not like this." He eased her back down and crouched beside her. "You'll ride when it's time, not walk." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not one to be waited on." "I'm not doing it out of pity," he said. "There's nothing soft in helping someone stand." Her eyes scanned his face, and he saw something shift again, a flicker of trust. Steadier this time. "I believe you," she said. That night, she asked him about the burn scar along his forearm. "Campfire in the dark," he said. "A horse panicked and kicked over the kettle. Didn't see it coming." She traced the edge of the scar with her eyes, not touching. "Looks like it hurt. Didn't feel it until the next day. I fell into a root cellar once when I was 12. Cut my thigh on a broken crate. Took 4 weeks before I could ride again." He tilted his head. "You ride?" "Since I could walk," she said. "My father had a roan gelding named Jasper, mean as a snake. I was the only one he'd let near him." He smiled at that, a quiet, genuine thing. "I'd like to see that," he said. "You on a horse that won't listen to anyone." She chuckled. "You'd think I'd be used to stubborn creatures by now." Gideon leaned forward then, elbows on his knees. "You're not planning to go back to Elk Hollow, are you?" Her face softened. "There's nothing left there. Just a broken roof and ghosts." He nodded once. "Then where?" She looked down at her folded hands. "I don't know. I thought maybe my cousin's place. But if he didn't come to meet me." He waited. "I was thinking I might head north. I heard there's work in Fort Benton. Laundry, maybe, or cooking for the trading post." He rubbed the back of his neck, choosing his words. "There's room here," he said, "if you wanted it." She looked at him, startled. "I wouldn't ask you to stay out of debt," he said. "Only that. I've had your company this week, and I'd rather not see it go." "I don't want to owe anyone," she said carefully. "You wouldn't," he said. "We'd make our way together. You'd just have to want it." She said nothing at first, but her shoulders eased, and her eyes stayed on his. "I'll think on it," she said. "I promise." And for the first time since she'd come through his door, Gideon felt a quiet hope take root. Something steady. Something with a future. The next 3 days brought a slow thaw, the kind that softened the edges of winter but left ice crusted beneath the needles in the shade. Gideon kept to the outer paths, checking the line of traps he'd set further south, always returning with something useful: snowshoe hare, a brace of grouse, once even a half-frozen bag of oats left behind at the old line shack near the ridge pass. Each time he stepped through the door, Bess was waiting, hunched over a task or watching the pines through the small window above the hearth. Each day a little stronger on her wrapped foot. One afternoon, he found her sorting through his shelves, setting aside tins and jars with quiet thought. "You don't label your stores," she said, not turning around. "I can tell what's what by the shape of the jar. That only helps one of us." He crossed the room and leaned against the post. "You planning to reorganize everything I own?" "I'm planning to cook something that doesn't taste like boiled bark," she said, holding up a tin to sniff it. "If that's all right with you, I'd be a fool to stop you." She gave a short nod, pleased, and returned to her task. That evening, the cabin filled with the scent of salt pork and dried apples simmered down with cornmeal. He didn't say anything, but he ate every bite and went back for seconds. She watched him finish the last spoonful. "I'll take that as approval." "Strong approval," he said. "I haven't eaten like that since I left Tennessee." "You're from Tennessee?" Her brow lifted. "That's the first I've heard of it." He wiped his mouth with the edge of his sleeve. "Didn't think it mattered." "It does now," she said. "Tell me something else." He leaned back in his chair, considering. "There's a tree near the old mill road, big sycamore. I carved my name into it the day before I left for war. My brother's name too, right under mine." Her expression shifted, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. "I carved my name once, into the old barn door. My father was furious." "What for?" "For using his all without asking." He chuckled low in his throat. "Sounds like he raised you sharp." "He raised me to be ready," she said. "For anything." Gideon nodded slowly. "He did a fine job." Later, as she stitched a tear in one of his shirts, she asked, "You ever think about leaving this place for good?" "Every spring," he said. "Then the snow melts, the creeks swell, and I remember why I stayed." She set the shirt aside. "I used to think the world ended at the edge of our land, like the hills just dropped off into nothing. It ever feel that way now?" "Not since I saw the ridge from above," she said. "And not since you found me on it." He didn't speak. Instead, he reached for the kettle, the silence between them thick with something unspoken but not uncomfortable. The next morning, she stood without help, bracing herself against the edge of the table. He watched from the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing until she took 3 steps and sat back down, winded but smiling. "Don't say it," she warned. "I wasn't going to." "Yes, you were." He folded his arms tighter. "I was going to say it's good to see you on your feet." "Oh," she said, surprised. "Well, that's fair." He walked to the bench and sat across from her. "You still thinking about Fort Benton?" "I was," she said. "Not so much now." "Why not?" She looked at him thoughtfully, then glanced around the cabin. "Because I'd rather cook in a place where the only man I serve is one who brings me rabbits and keeps the roof patched." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I could build a second room," he said, "close off the far end. Give you space." "Don't think I need a separate room, Gideon," she said softly. "Not unless you want it that way." He stood slowly, walked to the window and stared out at the heavy clouds gathering again along the ridge. "I've been alone a long time," he said. "Not because I wanted to be, just didn't know how to stop." "You think I do?" she asked. "I've been running since spring. I don't want to keep running." He turned toward her. "Then stay." She rose to her feet, still favoring one leg but steady, and crossed the few steps between them. "I'll stay," she said, voice low. "If you'll have me." He reached out, his hand settling at her waist, and her fingers curled around his wrist. "I will," he said. She leaned in then, and he met her halfway, their foreheads touching first, breath mingling in the quiet. The kiss came after slow, certain, with the weight of all the days behind them and the promise of more ahead. Outside, snow fell again, soft as a blessing. By late March, the thaw had reached the valley floor. Runoff crept through the gullies in silver ribbons, and the pines shook their limbs free of snow like worn dogs waking from sleep. The roof leaked twice, both times along the seam Gideon had warned would need mending come spring. Bess patched it with pine pitch and dry cloth while he hauled fresh shingles from the old wagon bed he kept stashed under tarpaulin. The rhythm of their days shifted, not by decision but by quiet understanding. She rose early, swept the hearth and set water to boil. He gathered wood, sharpened tools dulled by winter, and brought in what meat he could catch. They didn't speak of what came next. Instead, they built a life by degrees, one task at a time, one shared glance that lingered longer than the last. One evening, as twilight bled across the ridgeline, Bess sat on the porch step with a basket of damp linens balanced on her knees. Her hair was pinned up with a twig she'd smoothed against the whetstone, and her cheeks were flushed from steam and sun. Gideon leaned against the post beside her, arms crossed. "You always work like the day's running out." She didn't look up. "I don't know how else to be. You could rest." "I rest when I sleep." He watched her hands twist a cloth into a tight coil. "You afraid if you stop, something'll catch up?" She paused, wringing the fabric slower. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't want to feel the stillness too much." He didn't press. Instead, he sat beside her, close enough their shoulders brushed. "I've been thinking about building a shed for the tools," he said. "Something with a roof that won't buckle in the snow." She nodded. "You'll need a second pair of hands for the frame." "I was hoping you'd say that." She folded the last cloth into the basket, then turned toward him. "You ever think of adding another horse?" "Not since the last one died," he said. "Why?" "Might be nice to have a spare for hauling. Or riding, if someone wanted to go farther than the creek." His brow lifted. "You planning a trip?" "No," she said. "Just thinking of the future." That night, she took her time braiding her hair before bed. Gideon sat by the window, carving a new handle for the axe. The lantern between them cast long shadows up the wall. "You ever wish for children?" she asked, voice quiet but firm. His hand stilled over the wood. "Sometimes. I never thought I'd have the kind of life that made room for them." "You do now." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You want that?" "I've thought about it since I was young. Thought maybe it wouldn't happen after everything that's passed." Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. "But I'd like to try. With you." He set down the carving knife, stood, and crossed the space between them slow. "You listen to the world like it's a thing worth hearing," he said. "You make this place feel like more than survival." Her breath caught. "Then let's build something more." He reached for her hand, and she rose without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, they began clearing the lower grove, marking space for a vegetable bed. Bess planned rows with stakes and twine, and Gideon turned the soil with a broad hoe he'd reforged from scrap iron. She began saving eggshells and ash for compost. He hauled stones to edge the plot. One morning, she came out with a folded scrap of paper in her hand. "I made a list," she said. He took it, squinted at the scrawl. 2 milk goats, a salt barrel, and a Bible? I never said I was practical all the way through." He laughed, the sound low and open. "The Bible's not a bad idea. We could stand to have something to read besides that squirrel-chewed almanac." She tilted her head. "You ever been married, Gideon?" "No, would you?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." She swallowed. "Then we should go into town come thaw. Get it done proper." He touched the side of her face, rough hand against her skin. We'll go when the passes are clear, and we'll come back with what we need to start the rest." That night the fire burned low, but neither of them stirred to feed it. They lay together in the warmth they'd made, the spring wind sighing against the walls, and the soft breath of trust between them. Outside, the first frogs began to sing. The river broke up in early April, loud and sudden. Chunks of ice shattered down the bends, carrying branches and winter's debris past the cottonwoods and out of sight. Gideon stood on the bank with his arms folded, watching the water push against itself like it had somewhere to be. Bess stood beside him, a shawl tight around her shoulders and her boots sunk deep in the softening ground. "The bridge near Big Rock'll be washed out," she said. "We'll take the south trail," he answered. "It'll be slower, but it holds better in spring." They didn't speak again until the sun dipped low. That evening, he pulled down the cedar box from the rafter shelf, the one he hadn't opened since the year he built the cabin. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were coins, a folded deed to the land, and a small silver brooch shaped like a dogwood blossom. He hadn't remembered the brooch until his hands found it. He turned it over in his palm. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they married." Bess leaned on the table beside him. "You've had it all this time. I never had reason to give it to anyone." She reached out and touched the edge with her finger. "It's lovely." He looked at her then, her eyes lit by lantern glow, and he knew without doubt that he'd waited the right amount of time, and no longer than he needed to. They left for town 3 days later, bundled in wool and carrying supplies for the ride. The trail was thick with mud, but the weather held. When they reached the first rise above the valley, Bess turned in the saddle, looked back at the cabin nestled under the trees. "I didn't know I'd miss it," she said. "You'll be back before the moon shifts," Gideon told her. "With a new name if you still want it." She smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. Took 2 days to reach the settlement. They stayed in the back room of the Cooper's house, a friend of Gideon's from a few winters before. The man and his wife didn't ask questions, offered them bread and a dry cot, and that was enough. At the county clerk's office, they stood side by side as the papers were signed. Gideon pressed the brooch into her palm before the minister spoke a word. She fastened it at her throat without hesitation, her fingers lingering on the cool metal. The vows were plain. They didn't need more. Afterward, they shared a meal with the Cooper's family. Bess sat at the head of the table, her braid tied back with a ribbon the minister's wife had offered her, and laughter came easier than it had in years. Gideon didn't say much, but he watched her like he was learning the shape of a new horizon. Before they left town, they bought a hand-forged kettle, a new pair of boots for Bess, and a young bay mare with a broad chest and an easy temperament. She named the mare Juniper before they cleared the edge of town. The ride home was slower, the trail rutted in places, but neither of them minded. They made camp one night beneath a bluff, and Gideon built a fire while Bess unpacked the bread and smoked meat they'd been gifted. They sat shoulder to shoulder, the warmth between them deeper than the flames could offer. "I never thought I'd start again," she said. "I never thought I'd want to," he answered. She leaned her head against his arm. "We'll have to plant the onions soon. And the beans." "We will," he said. Together. When they reached the cabin, the door creaked the same way it always had, and the air inside still smelled of pine dust and ash. But it felt different now. Full. They unpacked slowly, setting things in their new places. That night, she moved her few belongings into the trunk beside his, and they didn't speak of separate rooms again. The weeks that followed filled with work. They planted a garden, stretched fencing for the mare, and traded with a traveling tinker for a second-hand loom. Bess began weaving on cool mornings while Gideon split kindling or repaired the barn eaves. They spoke more now not of what had come before, but of what might come after. One morning, Bess knelt beside the garden row, her hands pressed to her belly. Gideon saw her from the porch and crossed the yard without calling out. When he reached her, she looked up, her face unreadable. "I think we'll need to build a cradle," she said. He crouched beside her, his hand sliding over hers. "All right," he said. That summer, they added a second room to the cabin, wide enough for a cradle and a window that looked east. Gideon carved the frame from ponderosa pine, and Bess sewed curtains from the flour sacks they'd been saving. She didn't complain much, even as her steps grew slower and her back stiffened. He took on more of the chores without being asked. By October, the leaves turned gold and fell in great drifts across the yard. One evening, as the first frost came and the sky turned sharp with stars, Bess gave birth to a daughter with a full head of dark hair and a cry loud enough to startle the chickens from their roost. They named her Clara. Bess rested with the child curled against her chest, and Gideon sat beside them, his hand around hers, his face drawn with awe. He didn't speak, just watched the rise and fall of their breathing like it was something holy. Later, with Clara asleep in the cradle and Bess dozing near the fire, Gideon stepped outside. The wind had quieted. Above him, the stars stretched wide and clear, like a map to a place he'd finally arrived at. He looked back through the window, saw the soft lamplight catch Bess's face, the line of her cheek against the pillow, the cradle beside her. He'd built a quiet life once. Now it wasn't quiet, it was full, and he wouldn't trade a single moment of the road that brought him to her. Inside, Bess stirred, half asleep, and reached for him. He went to her without hesitation, settled beside her on the bed they now shared, and pulled the blanket over all three of them. The wind pressed gentle against the walls, and Gideon closed his eyes with his hand resting over hers, their daughter's breath soft in the cradle. And in the stillness there was peace, earned, steady, and built to last.